I want you to imagine stepping into a place that was once one of Canada's most infamous prisons, a place that held thousands of lives within its cold, dark stone walls for over 175 years. A place with stories of suffering, death, and punishment that linger long after the last doors were closed. This is the story of Kingston Penitentiary, a haunted place that continues to terrify those brave enough to enter its gates. This isn't just a ghost story. This is history, tragedy, and the paranormal all mixed into one terrifying tale. This is the story of how the Kingston Penitentiary became one of the most haunted locations in Canada, and why people still can't shake the feeling that it's alive. It all began in 1835 when the British government decided they needed a secure, centralized prison to house dangerous criminals. And so, they chose the small city of Kingston, Ontario, a strategic location on the shores of Lake Ontario, with easy access to the rest of Canada. They built Kingston Penitentiary from stone and iron, a grim testament to control, order, and punishment. This prison was meant to house criminals, political dissidents, and anyone they deemed a danger to society. But the thing about prisons is they're more than just buildings. They become alive with suffering, with the souls of those who pass through them. Kingston Penitentiary was brutal from the very beginning. It was a place of overcrowding, abuse, isolation, and death. Over the years, tens of thousands of people passed through its gates, many of whom would never leave. Some would die there. Some would disappear into its darkness. Life inside Kingston Penitentiary was not just difficult, it was horrifying. The prison was overcrowded, malnourished inmates were forced into labor, and the guards were strict and unforgiving. Solitary confinement was often a punishment for the smallest infraction, and the isolation cells, those cold, windowless chambers, were reserved for the most disobedient prisoners. Prisoners would spend days, sometimes weeks, in these spaces, their sanity slipping with each passing hour. Many of them never came out. Disease spread quickly, malnutrition was rampant, and violence was a constant threat. These conditions created an environment where the very walls of the prison seemed to weep with suffering. The sound of footsteps on stone, the creak of doors, the groans of pain as inmates were shackled. These became the sounds of everyday life here. But for many, it was the sound of death, of despair, and the sound of souls being broken. It's easy to forget that places steeped in suffering carry the weight of all those who have endured torment. And Kingston Penitentiary was no exception. Over the years, the number of deaths in the prison due to disease, violence, malnutrition, and executions began to stack up. Some of these deaths were sudden. Others were slow and drawn out. All of them created a spiritual footprint, a kind of resonance that would linger long after the final doors closed. Some believe that the very souls of the men who died in these stone walls never left, that they are still here, wandering the dark hallways, trapped by the violence, suffering, and punishment that defined their final days. This belief is echoed by guards, visitors, and even paranormal investigators. Now let me take you through the most chilling stories tied to Kingston Penitentiary. The first is the sound of footsteps. Footsteps that come from nowhere. Footsteps that follow you. Footsteps that stop when you stop. Many visitors report these sounds when they're exploring the empty hallways of the prison at night. Then there's the sound of whispers. Distant whispers that seem to come from the depths of the prison. Voices speaking in hushed tones in places where no one should be. Some say these whispers are from the spirits of long-forgotten inmates, trying to communicate their pain. And then there's room 873, the most infamous part of the penitentiary. Room 873 was a cell that had its own dark reputation. Rumors suggest that it was the site of a violent murder, or perhaps the death of a troubled inmate. Today, the room has been sealed off, but even still, visitors report cold drafts in the area and the sensation of being watched. And if you've ever wondered whether you could feel the presence of spirits in a prison, the answer is always yes here. Cold spots, figures in the dark, footsteps in empty cells. Paranormal investigators have all reported the same thing. Kingston Penitentiary is alive with the echoes of its tortured past. After its official closure in 2013, paranormal investigators began to flood Kingston Penitentiary, drawn by its reputation. With modern ghost hunting technology, thermal imaging, EMF detectors, audio recording, they've documented everything from ghostly footsteps to sudden temperature changes and strange anomalies. The idea is simple. Kingston Penitentiary is haunted because the walls hold the souls of those who suffered and died within them. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's no denying that something strange lingers here. Kingston Penitentiary is a place where history and hauntings collide, a place where punishment, suffering, and death created a spiritual storm that continues to linger. Some ghosts fade with time, but not here. Not at Kingston Penitentiary. Here, the shadows remain, always watching, always waiting, and perhaps always suffering. Would you dare to visit this haunted place? To walk its cold halls in the dead of night and see if the footsteps follow you? Some stories are better left as legends, but others, they're waiting for you to uncover them. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone brave enough to hear it. Also leave a comment if you know any interesting stories that you want me to cover. And remember, the past is never truly gone. It's always waiting to be discovered.